Steve, thanks for joining us. Good to have you at the Open Storage Summit. Why don't you introduce to the audience who you are and what you do?
So I'm Steve Jordahl. I work in the Strategic Alliances Division at Citrix Systems. I focus on our largest partners and helping enable them with Citrix technologies so they can go sell our technologies to their customers.
Wonderful. I know Zen Desktop is the hot topic in the market today.
Absolutely.
And VDI seems to be in the attention span of everyone related to IT.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk to us about how the market leader in Citrix is gearing up for that market? What do you see as some of the trends and some of the challenges, quite frankly, for customers who are wanting to deploy a VDI infrastructure in their premise?
Sure. So when you talk virtual desktop, the definition that Citrix uses is quite different than what the industry uses. Typically in industry, you're going to find that their definition is a Windows-based desktop running on a hypervisor. And that certainly is one way and probably the most utilized mechanism for virtual desktop. But Zen Desktop actually goes a lot further than that, and we can treat physical machines, manage them differently, and utilize them as virtual desktops. Have workstation class blades in the data center, things like that, or even use the device sitting on somebody's desk. We can treat that as a virtual desktop, manage it differently, and get a lot of benefit out of that. So the scope of virtual desktop for us is quite different. When you kind of look at the storage aspects of that, the storage ramifications at each different type of virtual desktop we can do are very different. Even going just into a virtual desktop on a hypervisor, we can do that 3-4 different ways, and the storage ramifications vary at each way. One of the biggest things people use is our provisioning services technology, which will separate the read I/O from the write I/O for an individual VM. Read traffic will come across the network and come across through the guest network of the hypervisor, allowing that machine to boot from the network. And then writes go somewhere else, and we have our choice. We can go to local RAM, we can go to local hard disk, which on a hypervisor equates to hypervisor-based storage, and then we can go back to the provisioning server if we want. Going back to the provisioning server, we'll add some latency, add a little performance hit, and reduce the scalability of provisioning server. And that's not typically the way we do it. We usually use target side storage. RAM gets too expensive, so the typical is to use the hypervisor-based storage. A lot of those times when you're doing that type of deployment, the storage ramification is huge. We're looking at a delta file, or delta changes from a parent disk that are being written down to this hypervisor-based storage array, and we're looking at 95% write, which is a very atypical I/O profile from a storage perspective. And so a lot of companies or a lot of storage arrays just are not ready to handle that unless you scale the disk really wide or throw in a lot of expensive SSDs or things like that. We did some testing a while back and found that with an Exenta store, we threw in a couple of 32 gig SSD hard drives or SSD drives into a small Exenta array, and we directed all of those Delta files for 100 targets, 100 VMs running on a single hypervisor to that Exenta store box, and we found that again 95% write was the profile. When we looked at how those bits were being laid out, there were 40 to 50% of them that were misaligned, which for a lot of arrays would have a problem. For ZFS, it doesn't introduce a problem. We found that data was not dedupable, but it compressed very well. So what we found is we were able to get all 100, I think we did 3 gig, we call them write caches, onto that one storage repository, and we got it down for a full run of our testing. We got down to like 4 gigs of space for all 100 of those, and that was really amazing to find out that we could do that with inline compression. And not have those latency hits and such, or RAID 5 write penalties and things like that you would typically find on other arrays.
Great, Steve. And I know some of the joint customer wins that we have between Citrix and Exenta. They love the fact that with Exenta you can decouple the software from the choices of hardware.
Absolutely.
That they need to put together the storage solution. So when you talk to your customers or prospects, what do you see as reaction or as sort of advantages that they perceive in this notion of removing the hardware and the software to get a storage solution built?
They find that there's a lot of value in that. You know, just like with Zen Desktop, there's a lot of options that you could do when you decouple that. You could use a model where you have that you have a virtual storage appliance running on top of a hypervisor, and then connect that to some other backend, and just use the capabilities there locally on the hypervisor. You can go to a top of rack solution where you have a main set of disks, but at the top of each rack is the Nexenta storage system that is doing all the magic for storage, and you know, kind of fan that in to a common set of disks. Those tend to be very well received when you look at those types of solutions.
Great, and I know you explained a lot about the choice of SSDs, the read cache and the write cache, and obviously Nexenta supports the hybrid storage pools natively. How important do you see the need for the support for the hybrid storage pools in a VDI deployment?
The converged array aspects of the Nexenta store, I think, are critical to having a unified storage platform in your infrastructure, right? When you look at the profile I just described with virtual desktops, you can kind of funnel those down to one type of storage, maybe over NFS, right? You want something cheap that'll fan out really nicely. When you start looking at server-based workloads, you can use the same technologies to do fiber channel or iSCSI storage, and there's a huge amount of benefit in having that common backend infrastructure, but having the connectivity mechanisms be so flexible from the Nexenta store.
Great. Steve, appreciate you taking the time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Doug, pleasure to have you here at the Open Storage